You've probably seen the headlines, right? They're talking about a potential internet apocalypse, warning that a massive solar storm could send our digital world back to the Stone Age, maybe even as soon as 2026. But how much of that is just hype and how much is a real threat we should be getting ready for? All right, let's get into it and figure out what's fact and what's fear. I mean, it's a pretty terrifying thought, isn't it? Our whole society, banking, communication, you name it, it all runs on the internet. So, the big question we're tackling here is a huge one. Could a monster storm from our own sun really knock us all offline, not just for a bit, but forever?
Well, here's the thing. This has happened before. Way back in 1859, the world was connected by telegraph wires. And when the most powerful solar storm we've ever recorded, the Carrington Event, hit Earth, it was chaos. It sent so much current surging through those wires that telegraph systems actually caught on fire. Pylons threw sparks, and some operators even got electrocuted.
So this isn't some hypothetical what-if scenario. Scientists who study this stuff are all pretty much in agreement. A storm as big as the Carrington Event isn't a matter of if it'll happen again, but when. And with the sun's activity ramping up, the odds are getting higher. So what would a storm like that do to our world today?
To really get a handle on the risk, we first need to understand what we're up against. So let's break down the anatomy of this cosmic threat. What exactly is a solar storm?
The main thing we're worried about is called a coronal mass ejection, or CME. Just picture the sun suddenly burping out this gigantic cloud of magnetized plasma. We're talking billions of tons of particles, all hurtling through space. And if Earth is right in the line of fire, bam! That cloud slams into our planet's magnetic field and triggers a huge geomagnetic storm.
Now, people often get CMEs mixed with solar flares, but they are totally different things, and the difference is crucial. A solar flare is a flash of light, of radiation that gets here in just minutes. It can mess with radio signals. But a CME, that's a physical cloud of stuff. It takes a few days to get here, and when it arrives, it creates these powerful electrical currents in long wires on the ground. They're called Geomagnetically Induced Currents, or GICs, and that is the real danger to our infrastructure.
And we've seen what even smaller storms can do. In 1989, a CME took down the entire power grid in Quebec, 6 million people in the dark. Then, in 2012, we got really lucky. A monster CME, one as powerful as the Carrington Event, shot through space right where Earth's orbit is. We missed a direct hit by just 9 days. We literally dodged a planetary-scale bullet.
Okay, so the threat is obviously real. But when we talk about an internet apocalypse, we're usually thinking about the heart of the internet, that massive web of fiber optic cables under the ocean connecting us all. And this is where the story takes a really unexpected twist. A fascinating new study actually monitored the real voltage on these transoceanic cables during solar storms. And their conclusion? It's a bombshell. Turns out, the backbone of the internet is incredibly tough. The researchers say that even a storm as big as the Carrington Event would not damage these cables. So that whole idea of the internet's core getting fried, it's probably a myth.
So how on earth are they so tough? Well, it all comes down to some seriously brilliant engineering. First, the equipment at each end of a cable is constantly making tiny adjustments to keep the power perfectly stable. Second, they have this amazing redundancy built in. Each end only supplies half the power, which means they've got a massive safety buffer. And finally, if a big surge does come through, powerful diodes are there to act like bodyguards, diverting the extra current away from the sensitive parts.
And get this, there's another hero here. The ocean itself. Seawater is conductive, so it acts like a giant shield, soaking up most of the storm's energy. By the time any of that energy gets down to the cables on the deep seabed, it's way weaker. The real impact is felt right at the coast, not thousands of miles out at sea.
Okay, so the internet's backbone, the fiber optic cables, are safe. Great. Case closed, right? Well, not so fast. The internet is way more than just cables, which brings us to the real weak spots in the system.
This is the key question, right? If the data superhighways themselves are safe, where's the danger? Well, the problem isn't the road. It's all the on-ramps and off-ramps. All right, so here are the two big Achilles heels. First, the power grid. All those super long transmission lines that stretch across continents, they act like giant antennas, just soaking up those geomagnetically induced currents. Those currents can flow right into and destroy the massive transformers that are the heart of the grid. Second, our satellites. The storm puffs up the atmosphere, creating drag that can pull satellites out of orbit, and it messes with the ionosphere, which garbles GPS signals.
So how bad can these storms get?
Scientists use a scale called the DNC measure it. Think of it like a golf score for Earth's magnetic field. The lower the negative number, the worse the storm. A superstorm back in 2015 clocked in at negative 233. A Carrington-level event would be way, way lower than that.
And this isn't just an abstract number. It has real-world consequences. Take a look at GPS. On a normal day, your position might be off by about 16 centimeters. But during that 2015 superstorm, the error jumped to over a meter. In a world that depends on precise GPS timing for everything from banking to flying planes, that kind of error is a really big deal.
So, we've got these super resilient cables, but a really vulnerable power grid and shaky satellites. Now let's connect the dots and see how this all spirals into cascading chaos, and what, if anything, we can do about it. When you lay it all out, you see this incredible contrast. The submarine cables? Low vulnerability. The core network is probably going to be fine. But the power grid and our satellites? High vulnerability. And that leads to the real threat. Widespread, long-term blackouts that would shut down the data centers, the cell towers, and everything else the internet needs to actually run.
And that's the bottom line. It doesn't matter if the undersea cable works perfectly if the data center on the other end has no power. It doesn't matter if your local network hub is dark, and it certainly doesn't matter if your Wi-Fi router at home is just a plastic box with no electricity. The internet fails not because the core breaks, but because all the endpoints go dark.
So, what's being done? Well, agencies are working with NASA to build better warning systems. The goal is to give power grid operators a heads up, telling them not just that a storm is coming, but exactly where the worst effects will be. That would give them time to do things like reroute power, or even temporarily shut down sensitive equipment to protect it.
Which brings us to our final verdict. We started with this terrifying idea of an internet apocalypse. So, after looking at all the evidence, is that what we're really facing?
The answer is complicated. An internet apocalypse where the network is physically destroyed forever? That's really unlikely. The cables are just too tough. But a massive, prolonged outage? That is very likely. If the power grid goes down, it could take huge parts of the world offline for weeks, maybe even months, while we scramble to replace those giant, custom-built transformers.
And that leaves us with the real question we need to be asking. It's not about whether the internet's core can survive. The science says it probably can. The real question is whether we can. Our internet's core might be safe, but can our society still function when all its fragile, power-dependent edges completely collapse? That's the challenge we really need to be thinking about.